for all the Egypts out there like myself, perhaps explain what a canon even means, apart from blowing someone's brains out, etc., and how they've been utilized in literature, music, art, etc. Because before we talk about AFI 100 or Sight and Sound or Empire, everybody's always come up with these lists of the canonical films or Martin Scorsese's favorites or Spike Lee's favorites. What is the role of the canon in the arts historically before an era where nothing really matters because it all disintegrates into white noise?
It's almost one of the worst things you can do to an art because it winds up creating this orthodoxy. I feel like that's where it comes from. Classical music, painting, sculpture, art, a lot of it biblical based. But the idea that our film canon is this thing that people started agreeing on after 80, maybe 50 years of the art form, when they started saying, here's what
I guess it goes back to like the Cinematheque in Paris when some very wise individuals started to realize you don't need to just break down these prints for their raw materials to be recycled. Maybe we can preserve some of these prints for future generations. Okay. Maybe it's a good idea to hang on to Charlie Chaplin's films. Maybe it's a good idea to hang on to Jean Renoir's films. And you start seeing the first generation of people at Cahiers du Cinema really coming up with what, from their point of view, is the canonical film history of like the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Guys like Godard, guys like Truffaut, who are like, these directors matter, these are the auteurs, these are the authors of the film. And you really start seeing the preservation of film culture at the time, which immediately took root in New York. People like Andrew Sarris fell in love with this idea, and we were off to the races, and the obsession with film history began.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't mean these things now. The canon means something different because we're in an age of hot takes. But now it's this idea of people just trying to show how pointy their head is, where they're just creating a list of, here's what you should see. Either to say, yeah, we're going to establish the primacy of movies that people thought had fallen by the wayside, or kids don't know what these movies are, or it's to tear it down, on the other hand, and say, well, we're not going to talk about Vertigo, we're not going to talk about these movies from yesteryear, we're going to talk about a new canon of movies that we're going to say apply today. They're not just based on
that's an old idea.
ideas.
Luis Buñuel, who we mentioned yesterday, a filmmaker I love, he had an idea in like the 20s of burning down the Louvre so that art could just kind of start over. It's like, yeah, forget about the canonical paintings. Let's burn it all down, get it going again. It's a very revolutionary act. And every generation has that. There's always that part of every new generation that should try to destroy and disregard the previous just to create room for the new stuff so you don't get completely, going back to the idea of nostalgia. It can choke off new creativity. So while I love lists and creating lists and so on and so forth, what I don't like the idea of saying, this is the canon of the golden age of Hollywood, and no new movies are allowed to be added to it. The canon is not complete, and Tarantino's a big advocate of this, where he's always refused to accept the idea that we know right now what the best 20th century movies are. There's always cool stuff waiting to be discovered. I don't want to tear down the old canon because it's disintegrating before our eyes, like sand going between our fingers just through just the atrophy of time already, but I do want to add some new movies. One
of the things I tasked you with, and myself at the same time, for the purpose of this exercise was to think of 5 movies. You're going to throw 5 at me? I don't know. I didn't think you were going to come in with, and I was hoping to surprise you with 5 movies. We grew up understanding that we have to go out and see Rear Window. I get it, and I've done all those things. But it's like, what is our own hunting turned up in terms of films that we think, well, it's clearly this is just a matter of omission or a lack of people seeing it, but this is just as good as something else along the way. But it's just, it's outside of that orthodoxy of the AFI Top 100.
And Scorsese embraced that philosophy when he worked with the BFI in the 90s. He created this extraordinary documentary, A Personal Journey Through American Filmmaking with Martin Scorsese. It's about 6 hours long. I've seen a lot of incredible movies because of it. But he said, look, I'm not going to celebrate Hitchcock in this because Francois Truffaut's already been there, done that. He did the Hitchcock-Truffaut interviews. We got the documentary, et cetera, and so forth. I'm trying to celebrate the unloved, the unsung films so that people will go back and see. Maybe F.W. Murnau's Sunrise or Sunshine? Sunrise from the late 20s. Sunshine's a science fiction movie from the 21st century. But he's always trying to shine a light on the unloved movies. And I've got some bangers that I've chosen.
I can't wait.
And I have to credit John Waters with being the first to kind of steer me in this direction, because one of these movies, he said, not only is it the best movie ever made, it's the best movie that will ever be made. Can you guess what that movie is?
Oh my God, Waters said that?
John Waters said
man,
this.
I almost inclined to say it's one of his, but he would never be so bold as to do that.
No, this is, little movie called Faster Pussycat, Kill, Kill.
I like where you're going with this.
And all 5 of my new Canon movies all come from the same source, the great Russ Meyer. And I'll say that Faster Pussycat, Kill, Kill, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, Super Vixens, Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, and for a 5th, it can be any of his other movies from Motorpsychos to the original Vixen to Harry, Cherry, and Raquel. I think the entire body of work of Russ Meyer belongs in the canon, but of course it will never go there because it has sex, which is still shameful and to be frowned upon to this day. And I find his exploitation films, his drive-in movies to be so much more rewarding and so much more enjoyable upon multiple reviewings than many other movies from the 60s and 70s that would play in a similar format or a similar venue. You want to talk about Grindhouse, you can talk about Jack Hill, you can talk about a lot of great filmmakers from that time, but I would put Russ Meyer alongside, Don Siegel, or I would put him, maybe not Sam Peckinpah, but maybe Robert Aldrich, like some of these guys who are making really cool, kick-ass flicks in the 60s and 70s, put Russ Meyer in with all those guys.
Sam Fuller, yeah, guys like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, combat photographer in World War II, goes to work for Playboy in the early 50s, develops a unique aesthetic, and as Roger Ebert pointed out years ago, you can watch any frame from any Russ Meyer movie that he ever made, and within seconds say that's a Russ Meyer movie.
Yeah, sure.
If that doesn't make you an auteur, I don't know what else does. But we'll get back. We'll circle back to the great Russ Meyer. Give me some new canon that you got percolating in your brain.
Okay, well, one movie I saw recently with our mutual friend Matthias van der Roost. There's a French director named Philippe de Broca who's made a bunch of movies in the 60s and 70s. He made this movie with Belmondo, the great Belmondo, the recently deceased Belmondo.
Tony Celefave.
Tony Celefave, a movie called That Man from Rio, 1964. And it is an incredible movie. I mean, I thought I knew what Belmondo was all about. Belmondo did his own stunts, which I don't think I was quite aware of that. And
he's a hurricane of a human being.
He is. It was like he was Jackie Chan before Jackie Chan in the way, it wasn't just doing stunts like, setups, gags like Buster Keaton did or something like that.
And handsome in ways that only a really ugly person can be handsome, like very charismatic but unconventionally
in a perfectly French way, no less. It's an adventure movie. He's like chasing around the globe. It's Indiana Jones sort of before there's Indiana Jones a little bit. And the beautiful part is that Rio, based on like the Gilberto music and samba, like there was this Brazilian thing that was entering culture.
The girl from Ipanema.
Yeah, the same way that like Hawaiian stuff had gotten into American culture in the 40s and 50s. There was the idea of the luau and the poo-poo platter and the pineapples. Like Brazil was that for the late 60s. There was definitely, it's sexy, it's warm, it's the beach, it's.
Stan Getz and Gilberto, when they collaborated on that album just called Getz Gilberto, it was a sensation.
Yeah.
Well, we swore we weren't going to do deep dives on all 5 movies, so give me some more.
The Sicilian Clan, 1969, Henri Verneuil. It fits right in with that Melville style of policier movie that he was doing. You want to talk about the swagger, the beauty of French cinema, the way the Frenchmen move the camera, and this guy Henri Verneuil. Maybe I'm probably not even pronouncing the guy's name correct. Look, I'm a Melville guy up and down, and there's so many beautiful things inside Melville's repertoire. But this guy dipped in and out of that same sort of cool style. And the beauty thing about the Sicilian Clan is that it's got Delon, all young, coming right out of doing Les Samurai. He looks as best as he ever, as good as he ever looked. But this movie, it's got him. It's got Jean Gabin, right, from No Touche Pas La Grisby.
The John Wayne of French cinema.
The John Wayne of French cinema. It's like using him as the older man, exactly the way that you'd hoped. He's the sort of crime boss of the family. And who's the cop chasing them both? Lino fucking Ventura.
Oh, cool.
Right? It's like, can you think of a bigger power play of all these guys who came out of that same atmosphere of doing gritty French noir? And they're all in the same movie. It's got such a great feel to it.
Yeah, from the mid-50s to the mid-70s, French noir came on strong, and so many bona fide classics, all of which belong in whatever canon it is that we are concocting out of thin air.
Elio Petri's movie from 1970, An Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion. Now,
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. Now, the Italian title, I'm sure, is a lot cooler than however I'm making it sound. But this guy, Elio Petri, maybe I'm a dumbass. I had never heard of him before I started watching all of his movies in a row. And we went on a dive. I mean, he made a movie called The 10th Victim, which is maybe the movie he's most known for. I think that was like 1966, 1967. Elio Petri, at his heart, was a northern Italian, with real leftist labor sympathies in his mind. And he had a big suspicion of power and authority. And this movie, this is Jean-Marie Volonté, plays like the police chief in a town somewhere in the north of Italy. And he he blows a gasket, right? He misses a screw goes loose in him. And he decides to instead use his power to start doing fucked up things off to the side, blatantly and loudly, to see if he'll get caught. Nobody looks his way because he's a moral pillar. He's the head of the police. And he's almost like outraged. He's testing the boundaries of society, saying, how hollow can we be that we don't notice deviance, even if I'm the one doing it? It is a great noir movie. It has all the Morricone score, absolutely beautiful. And again, Volonté was his guy. He made Elio Petri and Volonté made a bunch of movies together.
Gotcha.
And it's just magic. Again, an Italian dude in a whole sea of Italian dudes who is not acknowledged at all, made some incredible bangers, and he's the kind of guy.
Well, to be fair, Italian genre cinema in the 60s and 70s was so strong, you got to make a big, bold effort to stand out. Number 4, what do you got for us?
Charles Burnett's To Sleep with Anger, 1990.
Oh, wow.
Now, the thing is, everybody...
He's been on Marcus's podcast many times.
Yeah, I know. I love it. I love it. That's why I watched it, because Marcus and Scott over on Zebras in America was such big evangelists for it. 1990, Danny Glover makes that and Predator 2 in the same year. I know, hardcore. Talk about doing one for them and one for me. But Glover always put his money where his mouth is. He was producing movies from way back. So To Sleep with Anger was the first time I saw any of this information about the African American diaspora from the South to the West. People had come from, the whole movie is about people who had migrated to Los Angeles from the South in like the 30s and 40s and 50s. And these people knew, they had memories of what it was like being down in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and they still had these, the country feel. More than that, though, this movie has a sort of weird, tiny little supernatural bent where Danny Glover may in fact be the devil. And in my last, I'll give him my number 5 choice as a director I guarantee you've never heard of, and this is one of the wonderful explorations I've had from moving to Holland over the last 2.5 years. A guy named Alex van Warmerdam, Ober, comes out in 2006. And it is a little bit of a surrealist picture. If you know the work of, for instance, Aki Kaurismäki, the Finnish director, there is this real deadpan type, po-faced, everyday style to what this guy does.
Is there any other country that's embraced this stuff, or is he just a homegrown hero?
No, he had one movie. This guy had one movie in Cannes, 2013, a movie called Borkman, which people have seen. I know Martin Kessler has seen Borkman, and I've been evangelizing for this guy since Matthias brought it in. Matthias is the one who let me know that this guy's a thing. It looks great. He's a visual artist. He's been at it for a long time. I would just say go in blind. It's tough to find. That's the thing. It's it's Dutch with subtitles. But the thing is, this is the movie that Matthias van der Rohe started me on Van Warmerdam with. I would absolutely recommend anybody find any of his movies you can, whether it's Borgman or Ober or the movie you just came out, a movie called Number 10. But he's absolutely someone you should find out. So this is like a icebreaker for the micro canon of Alex van Warmerdam and his particular Dutch version of cinema.
When you're first discovering all this great stuff, that's when your film love is at its most feverish, its most intense. If you at any point just accept the idea that you have kind of seen the canon and it's done, it's very easy to just kind of let that be something you let go. It's like in the past. If you're not constantly trying to add new movies to whatever canon might exist in your head, you've kind of given up. And I'll never forget reading the New York Times Magazine article in the late 90s when they had Woody Allen and Martin Scorsese come in and talk about their films at that time. And Woody was talking about how he hadn't seen a movie in a long time and didn't give a damn. And Martin Scorsese said that for the first time he'd seen Dziga Vertov's experimental late 20s Russian film Man with the Movie Camera for the first time.
Legendary.
And that he had been completely floored by it, and that he went back to work on Monday morning, probably bringing out the dead, whatever he was working on at the time. But that he went into that work week completely, totally inspired. And at age 22 or 23, I was like, fuck yeah, like I love that movie, like that's so cool. But as you get older, it is harder to develop new tastes. It's harder to remain open. It's harder to remain curious. Do you have any kind of tricks of the trade to keep your mind in like a sponge-like mode where you are open to new filmmakers, you are open to new experiences, so that the canon will always keep expanding?
Absolutely. And it's simple. Listen to smart people when they tell you what to watch. Honestly, one of the best things, because I'm a dumbass I don't have my compass spins in a circle like I'm standing next to a magnet. The best things I've watched, fucking hands down in the last 8 years, has been what smarter people have told me to watch, is what you've said to watch on the show. Every single one of the guests you've had on Wrong Reel, whether it's Marcus or Martin or Matthias or Jacob or John or
David Lambert,
Sky or Lambo,
Kevin
any of these
Marr,
guys that come through here. I know I'm quoting for the converted here. Yeah, the thing is, it's like that has expanded. Listen to this Pink Smoke guys, for fuck's sake. Listen to Pure Cinema Podcast. Part of this, the idea, what really inspired this, certainly.
I'm going to add one to the mix as I choke on scotch. The Bret Easton Ellis podcast, which is the podcast I quote most frequently. In an era where it's so easy to get cynical and bitter and hate everything, etc., that is, for me, the most intense kind of home for diehard film conversations that I've been exposed to over the last 8 or 9 years, where whether he's talking to Bogdanovich or Walter Hill or Tarantino, it is where a true cinephile will feel most at home, where the canon is alive and well, film history is alive and well, they're constantly making fresh discoveries, and also, to borrow your phrase, shitting on other movies from a great height. They are also wildly pessimistic, as only people in their late 50s can be. People who grew up in the 70s going to see Days of Heaven in the theater, knowing what that's like to experience it firsthand. So in terms of listening to smart people, I just want to add the BEE or the BEE podcast to your list that you just mentioned.
This canon exercise for me, the reason I brought it up is because I want it ongoing for me. This has to pay back to me. I want this as a reflexive exercise.
Yeah, and also for the people who love the AFI Top 100 list, I'm not saying don't go back and watch all the George Cukor films from the 30s and 40s. I've done episodes on George Cukor. I love George Cukor. I mean, Philadelphia Story is one of the most wildly entertaining movies you will ever see while alive on this planet. We're just saying, add all this other shit on top of the existing canon. So if you love the Golden Age, keep your love of the Golden Age ironclad and intact, but just make a little room for Russ Meyer in your heart. It's a guy who would run out into the desert and a couple of hot actors and come back later, a few weeks later, with a vintage piece of Americana with all sorts of interesting societal commentary and comedy and action and thrills. And yeah, it's real filmmaking.